Hey, Congressman, thank you for joining the Business Corner.
Great to be here.
So you are in your fifth term as Congressman, and I know you've been doing a lot with small businesses and creating opportunities. Tell us a little bit about what that has been like while you've been in Congress.
Yeah, well, first, let me say it is a pleasure to be on your podcast. I mean, you personally, not to embarrass you, have one of the standout careers for a small business person and what you've been able to build.
Thank you.
And it's, as I tell everyone when your name comes up, you have one of the careers I really admire. And, essentially what I want to do in my job is help support and build the support system so there can be more Teresa Lundys in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. Because when you look at our city, it's the best of times, it's the worst of times.
Right.
On the one hand, we have neighborhoods that when I was growing up in Philadelphia, I'm born and raised here, grew up in the Olney neighborhood. There are parts of Philadelphia today that are doing so much better than the 1980s, mm-hmm. which was the height of the crack epidemic and job losses and population losses. At the same time, while there are parts of our city that are doing better than ever and we're attracting people to come here, which was really unthinkable back when I was growing up, on the other hand, it is a fact that we are the poorest big city mm-hmm. in the country. So for a lot of people, it's also the worst of times. So then the question is, as someone who's not in the private sector, what can I do in my role to allow other small business folks to be successful, to encourage them, to incentivize them, to give them the tools that they need? And so obviously I'm working on federal legislation as a member of Congress, but it comes out of my experience of being born and raised in Philadelphia, and I represent about half of the city today. Mm-hmm. So when you look at things, for example, when everything just suddenly stopped in the pandemic, mm-hmm. and as a member of the Ways and Means Committee, working 16, 17 hours a day on legislation that we had to get done immediately, we devised things like PPP mm-hmm. in order to ensure that jobs could not be lost. Yeah. We did things like the small business loans. Mm-hmm. Those are the sort of emergency relief programs that I was a big part of helping create. And then we do other things as well. What we find is, and typically this gets no attention at all from the media, but we have a lot of small businesses that have a tough time navigating the system.
Right.
In my office, we have a great relationship with small business agencies and parts of the government that work with small businesses like the SBA. We help bridge that gap. We will represent small businesses like they're our clients and work with the IRS on their behalf on various sorts of issues. So those are the sorts of things, and there are many others as well, that we do to attempt to support those truly small businesses that are in our district.
You know, that's so important. We're coming up on 9 years of business. And at the 5th year was when the pandemic actually started, right? So, you know, what they say in business, at 5 years, it's kind of a make it or break it. And so if it wasn't for PPP, EIDL, the emergency response, even from the federal level, I don't believe we would be in business, you know? So it was encouraging to see how the U.S. really stepped up for small businesses. But it also made small businesses and small business leaders really think about the impact. Like, I didn't think about the small having a loan, right, or getting credit. I didn't need it because the capital was in the business. But then when you start to see anything can happen at any time, it's like, okay, now I need to start looking at other resources. And so another thing is kind of why this podcast exists, is to give people a snapshot into what your government is doing for you with the right leadership. So I do appreciate that. So because, and I know you already mentioned that you serve as the ranking member in the House Budget Committee, which is always a special part of my life. I love budgets. Tell us about your approach to leadership and what impact collaboration you've had on that success.
Yeah, well, first, I do just want to say, it really makes me happy to hear what you just said.
Okay.
That you're one of many, many businesses that were directly impacted by some of the work that we did during that time. And I have to say, it is a demonstrated economic fact that the United States has the strongest recovery from COVID in the world. And I truly believe it is because of programs like PPP and others and the direct support to individuals that we were able to do, which was more robust than any other country.
Wow.
And that's a big reason why we've been able to come back in a way that they still haven't. Now, you mentioned I am also the ranking member of the Budget Committee as the lead Democrat, and hopefully, if we're able to win the majority in November, I would be chairman of the committee, which would obviously be a real honor. I would be the first Philadelphian
I love that.
to be the chair of a legislative committee since William Gray.
Okay.
Back in the late 1980s, who was also chair of the Budget Committee. And it's a great platform because you've seen previous chairs like Paul Ryan and John Kasich from the conservative perspective, or Bill Gray or Leon Panetta back in the day from the Democratic perspective, use the committee to outline an agenda for what those of us who are left of center believe and what government can do in people's lives working with the private sector.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of my approach and how I work with people, I believe that politics and government is about winning converts, not chasing heretics. And so sometimes, let's face it, there are those who approach politics and want to challenge the purity of folks on their own side and can't take yes for an answer.
Right.
My view has been to attempt to work with anybody and everybody. And that can sometimes be difficult because in this era, I don't have to tell you, there are some really interesting personalities on the other side of the aisle with whom I have to work. And I really attempt to check myself. And even though it would be easy to spout off or dismiss people, that's a real mistake.
Yeah.
Barack Obama on a podcast maybe 2 years ago talked in detail about this. And I completely agree with what he said. Talked about the tendency sometimes we can have as human beings to dismiss people or think we're somehow holier than thou and above them. His advice was resist that temptation. And I fully agree with that. I've seen it in politics because, someone can be horrible on X, horrible on Y.
Right.
And then you realize, you can work with them on Z. So that has always been my approach. It sometimes opens me up for criticism from some folks who, think that I should be perhaps, always acerbic or should be saying outlandish things or, kind of have that sort of style. I'm my own person. I'm true to who I am. I'm confident enough and been doing this long enough to go my own path. And in my view, I have a responsibility to my constituents to try to work with anyone and everyone on the other side of the aisle who can help me help the people who elected me.
I love that. And it kind of goes into some of the investments, that Congress and the Biden administration has made over the last 4 years. Tell me what that investment was that you guys did after the pandemic. What else have we done to support the Pennsylvania and the region? Yeah,
because Joe Biden becomes president January 20th of 2021.
Right.
So about 10 months after the pandemic really hit, although January of 2021 actually ended up being the peak month of the pandemic, and sadly in terms of lives lost, we immediately got to work. The American Rescue Plan, which is what enabled a number of things, but including getting vaccines out earlier than almost anywhere else, or actually than anywhere else on Earth. That was in that piece of legislation. There was more direct aid to individuals in terms of those checks. One of the other things that we also passed in the American Rescue Plan was, and I'm sad to say it was temporary, a dramatic expansion of the child tax credit.
Yeah, I remember that.
That produced in 1 year a 46% reduction in child poverty. No congressional district in Pennsylvania had more families that were positively impacted by that than mine.
Wow.
And I represent neighborhoods in North Philly, Northeast Philly, Kensington, all the way down to Society Hill. When I look at the numbers of kids we were able to lift out of poverty, truly inspiring. Unfortunately, though, it was a temporary expansion. So we're currently right now fighting to revisit that and make it permanent. So,
Good.
But there were a number of other things as well. That was the American Rescue Plan. But then on top of that, we did the bipartisan infrastructure bill.
Yeah.
Which, a certain previous president, whenever he would talk about it being infrastructure week, people laughed. It was a joke. It became a punchline.
Right.
We're now in the middle of infrastructure decade because of that bipartisan bill. It wasn't really bipartisan in the House, but it was bipartisan in the Senate. And we were able to get that done. There were other pieces of legislation as well, the CHIPS and Science Act, which had a real impact on businesses and is continuing to do so. One of the challenges, though, when you're doing really big pieces of legislation that will have a generational impact, they take a while to roll out that money.
Right.
Because those investments have to be thoughtful. And so sometimes when you're on the 2-year cycle of re-election or the 4-year cycle, people don't necessarily see the immediate impact of these major pieces of legislation. But it is a fact that commentators have pointed out this has been the most robust domestic policy agenda since the 1960s, since 1965. And I think we will look back on the legislation that we passed in 2021 and 2022 and truly call it historic.
I love it. I mean, to live in this decade right now is to truly, be an American, and understand our values and commitment, to the cause. So if you were to leave some words of wisdom for up and coming leaders and young professionals, what would it be? Because I know you made history yourself a few times. So what would that be?
Well, I was planning to listen to the podcast so I could learn a few words of wisdom rather than dispense them. But truly, believe in yourself. There are a lot of people who are going to tell you no. There were a lot of people who told me no. When I first went down this path and ran for office, attempting to be the first Democrat ever to win my state legislative district way back when, I didn't win. It was very tempting to give up. And I had a lot of people who told me no. And so I got inspired by reading biographies of other people who have been successful. And it is remarkable, the consistencies, how many people told those individuals who we know of in history that they couldn't do it.
Right.
Or that they were, even silly for thinking they could do it. Don't listen to those naysayers. Cynicism gets confused for sophistication. It's not. Cynicism is lazy and it's easy. Believing in yourself is harder, but I encourage everyone to believe in yourself. You are more capable. All of us as human beings are a lot more capable than we realize.
Yeah.
And for me, even as I move forward, there's that little voice in the back of your head saying you can't do it or doubting you, quieting that voice, telling him to shut up. We all have that little voice. And my best advice would be, please, next time someone tells you no, don't listen to them. Think of this podcast. You absolutely can do it.
I love that. I'm inspired. I've been inspired by you, and thank you so much for the work that you and your team does each and every day.
Oh, thank you. And it's the same thing in reverse. I am inspired and motivated by the success you've had in your career, and I can't imagine what the future holds for you.